Hello, everyone. You're listening to TruthCat Radio at truthcatradio.com. The current time is 7:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's East Coast, USA. Although I myself am broadcasting from Chicago in the U.S. My name is Richard Kary, and this is Beyond the Matrix. And I'd also like to say hello to JP and everyone over at Wolf Spirit Radio, who we have simulcasting our show here. And also thank you for the simulcast. We appreciate all of your listenership, and thank you out there, all who are listening on Wolf Spirit. Well, today we have Sava Wolf returning to the program, and she's actually recently jumped on board and joined the TruthCat Radio team of hosts as well. We're going to be getting to our return interview with her in just a second. I do just want to first mention to all the listeners out there that we are completely listener supported here at TruthCat Radio. It seems more and more it's becoming necessary to even bypass advertisers who can be compromised with the war on independent media that we have out there. With that being said, listener support is the only way to truly guarantee independent radio, independent media that is not compromised, completely uncensored, lets you hear all the opinions, everyone's opinions, and their complete points of view, unfiltered. So, yeah, if you could please we get all of our support through our listenership, which we gravely appreciate. We're always trying to do improvements here, upgrading our equipment, which you've just undergone a considerable amount of, and we do plan to expand more in future. We're always adding hosts, a lot of great guests we always try to retain, and a lot of great topics and diversity. But yes, please, with your support is the only way that will continue. And you can use PayPal on our support page. A lot of people love the convenience of PayPal. So please help out with what you can. And a lot of times those extra little contributions that are last minute help make sure we keep all the bills paid for all our broadcasting. Anyone who might want to call in tonight, that call-in number will be 714-598-3125. That number again, 714-598-3125. And please join our groups on Facebook for TruthCat Radio, TruthCats, and Beyond the Matrix page, as well as the TruthCat page. But the TruthCats group is a great news group. And for that matter, our partner group of Graham Sutherland's, the Real Worldwide Truth Movement, is an excellent news group to share everything with us, as he was just mentioning, to network as effectively as possible, using the social media, no matter how it may be stacked against us, still to our advantage to fight back. Now then, all that being said, getting back to the show here, yes, we have Sava Wolf rejoining us today, and Sava believes that the art of clairvoyant reading provides a window toward future possibility based on the frequency you are emitting in present time. Her readings are intended to catalyze positive change and spiritual growth in order to release energy blockages so that you may manifest your heart's desires and follow your true soul's calling. The act of reading an aura creates a liminal space in which to get acquainted with the unique energy of the spirit, in addition to the myriad energies which may enhance or detract from the enjoyment of one's own personal space. The fascinating journey between the reader and the readee catalyzes positive change while simultaneously encouraging the release of outdated, outworn, or invading energies. And Sava specializes in aura readings, chakra clearing, karmic readings, relationship dynamics, past life readings, and symbols of the soul readings. She has studied clairvoyant reading and energy healing at InVision in Chicago and holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Visual and Critical Studies from the Art Institute of Chicago. And if I could add to that, she's also now a host of her own show here on Truth Cat Radio. So be sure to check out Violet Visions, which is on Mondays, and that would be 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or I'm sorry, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Chicago. That would be 5 Central. Sava, I just wanted to give you a full introduction. I didn't update. I know when I put out the announcements, but I guess a lot of people may have noticed from our groups. So how are you enjoying, doing a radio show?
Well, I absolutely love it. It's definitely a new experience, and it's a new skill that I'm going to have to acquire in addition to getting some more tech updates, figuring out what are the skills to be a good interviewer. And I know a lot of amazing people already that I do want to interview and feature and showcase, but I do have to kind of figure out, a little formula for how to get all the information across, in a certain time frame, and also leaving time for, small talk, question and answer. So it's just something to get the hang of, and I'm looking forward to acquiring this new skill and also using this platform to feature a lot of friends and healers that I do know, as well as healers that I kind of know peripherally that I would love to have a good excuse to contact and interview and get to know more about their own process. So I'm pretty excited about everything, if you ask me. So so how is all with you? What would you like to talk about today? What do you think everyone would like to hear about?
Oh, well, I just was first just asking how things were going. I enjoyed listening in and calling into your debut show. I unfortunately had to work and wasn't able to catch your second show this past week. But I hope everything went well with that guest, Alejandra.
Oh yes, definitely. Yes, I interviewed Alejandra Claire, the specialist of color healing from Healing with the Rainbow Rays, and she always does have a lot of exciting and interesting things going on. And it's so funny. She was like, "Oh, I think I would run out of steam after an hour and a half," and then after the 2-hour mark, I'm like, "Wow, there's still so much to talk about color healing." I have learned a lot about color healing from her, but she has this huge trove of knowledge, and I'm like, wow, I think even like 20 hours and she could still be sharing stuff that she knows about color healing, because it is really deep and complex, and a lot of people, don't quite realize that. I think a lot of people aren't very familiar with the complexity and how intricate color healing actually is. Like, for example, when I do healing work, I usually just keep it simple and work with gold energy, and sometimes I'll work with platinum and violet flame energies, but I generally keep it to just a few. But she's got this whole spectrum, so it's pretty interesting and fascinating. So I always wonder what it would be like to have such a big spectrum, just at your fingertips to be accustomed to working with regularly. So yeah, I just feel like it would be definitely something interesting for more people to learn about and to know about. I do love rainbow frequencies, and it's funny because a lot of times I will be posting a lot of things with rainbows or about rainbows, and then I will get a lot of fans or supporters from the LGBT community, and I always forget that that's the emblem for that community as well. But I think the rainbow is amazing. It's just so all inclusive, and it's just such a wonderful symbol. So yes.
Yes. And I was also thinking about that when I chose the general topic. I was trying to think of terms kind of general that would apply to a wide spectrum of metaphysics. And I thought of patterns, the concept of patterns. So I titled it Patterns and Energies. Now, I know patterns, they could exist in the astrology, in the numerology, and of course, all colors are frequencies, so those would all be patterns as well. There are so many things, really, that could be a variation of a pattern. And so I thought that would be just a great, starting point, just for all the different places we could take this with how all of these things affect us and all the different types of energies. If I don't know if you want to explore some of those kind of topics.
Well, that is a very an intuitive thing to bring up around the solstice time, because as we are in the time of the solstice, this is a cycle that is beginning, and we just ended a cycle that started in March with the March 21st spring equinox. And I feel like seasons are a wonderful place to observe the patterns that we have, and the way that we, the way that we keep certain energies going or end certain things that are needing to end is just, for example, here's a basic example, is a health pattern. If someone was excessively unhealthy and starting that energy around the time of the solstice, maybe going out or having too many wild nights, and starting that around the beginning of the spring solstice, and then realizing, okay, now that it's summer, I really want to change this pattern, to change this dynamic. So I feel like solstices are a great time of endings and beginnings, a great time to, end things that are toxic or outworn and begin new things, create new patterns and new cycles. But what I find is you have to be so careful about what it is you're doing on powerful days like a full moon, a new moon, or a solstice or an equinox, because if whatever you're doing is given so much energy and impact, for example, say you're deciding, okay, at the summer solstice, I'm going to start a cleaning and organizing kick, and that's going to give it a lot of energy and momentum. Or, you might be feeling really angry and have an angry tirade and release a lot of anger around the solstice. And then if that happens, that also adds even more energy and momentum to it. And then these things cycle back, and they cycle back from like 3-month season to 3-month season, but they'll also cycle back in smaller reflections, through those smaller like full moon and new moon monthly cycles. So it's just really wild. I never observed it so much until I started, doing like, community events around like solstice or full moon or new moon. And then it gave me an opportunity to kind of realize what these patterns were, both in myself and in people that I observed around me, both in life and clients that I work with, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I mean, I admit too, once I started taking note of some of these things, like one thing that I have an interest in is keeping aware of dates, calendar dates related to numerology, and just how it affects different people, and their numbers. And I know when you are aware of these things, you can see a lot of just striking connections. You can feel differences, you can feel changes, you can feel what I like to call high energy days, that could go either positive or negative. And like you say, could very much influence in a longer term. So yeah, you can definitely confirm a lot of these things as well. I don't know, would you like to share some examples or some of your experiences?
Yeah. I could think of a personal example is around the time of the solstice the time of the spring equinox in March. I was finding, I'm like, okay, I'm busier and busier and busier and busier. Where am I going to get excess energy so I can complete all the tasks that I need to complete? And then I was finding myself, having more and more caffeine, more and more coffee. And it was like getting ramped up. And then now, by the end of the season, it's a new season, and by the end of last season, I was like, whoa, I am completely burned out. My adrenals are exhausted. I have to, really watch any, caffeine consumption and energy levels, and figure out what are natural ways that I can up my energy levels and boost my energy levels and just be healthier in general. And so I did learn some difficult lessons about, okay, where do I reach for this extra energy, and how can I just ramp myself up and run on fumes? And so it's something that really started to snowball around last spring equinox, around 3 months ago. And then towards the end of the spring season, I found myself super, super exhausted. Or, I've seen, people who are maybe creating a desire for more fitness or more health. And I was seeing a lot of that around the winter solstice, around Christmas time. And a lot of people are like, hey, I've been living, an unhealthy city lifestyle. I want to, stop late nights, or stop, eating on the go, or not being healthy, and just create a better regimen. And maybe 6 months ago, they have that desire in question. And, like season by season, it's like they're slowly getting there. And so I just feel like those are good things, I guess, that can be put into play is just being healthier and getting your energy from more natural sources. But, if you can put the wrong thing there, like if a fight is percolating or bubbling up, or, resentments that you're holding on to, or, grudges, those type of things, I think doing that in the beginning of such a season can really add momentum that you're really not going to see reflections of later. And that's what I really realized, is that everything is a cycle, especially the solstice and equinox times are the biggest ones, the 4 biggest ones of the year. But all of these little mini new moon and full moon cycles, it's like you have to be careful about what you do every day, because every day you're literally planting the seeds for what's going to crop up in your face and in your life in 2 weeks from now, in a month from now, in 4 months from now. And you never know how it's really going to happen. But what you do know is that it's always important to be positive and put positive things into action, because even if you're accidentally, mindlessly doing something with negativity, it'll really crop up and cycle around later. And it's like every day we're really planting the seeds for what's going to happen in our future, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people, like as you said, maybe on an unconscious level, are compelled, toward sensing these marks in between the cycles, changes in their life that are, get inspired without them really having a good understanding, though, of where that's coming from. Maybe it would be more beneficial to them, if they knew, where that was coming from, where they could actually be sure to direct it in a positive way for the long term, for their life. I know our ancient ancestors, from everything I've heard, had a lot more connection to a lot of these things, such as the solstice and equinox. I don't know, what sort of information have you researched on just the ancient cultures, awareness of these important factors?
I don't know much historically about the way people did things, of the seasons. I mean, I just have that very basic rudimentary knowledge of, people in, earlier times were very connected with seasons and harvests, et cetera. But yeah, I don't know too much about the past and history. I think the only thing I really know that's like a tidbit of interesting information about patterns and habits, cycles in the past, is I remember once reading an article a couple years ago about how during dark winter times in Europe, people used to sleep twice a day. It was something called like a second sleep, and there was like so many hours of darkness, and so they would stay awake during all like hours of daylight and then like have sleep at 2 different times. So I just remember reading an article about that, and I found it pretty fascinating, and I just thought that was interesting. And I think that was in some darker places in Europe where it was a very like heavy work oriented lifestyle, like a heavy farming or agrarian oriented lifestyle, that there was those 2 sleeps. So I found that pretty interesting. But yeah, besides that, I don't know much. I should know more about ancient cultures, but I'm always so focused on the future.
Okay, all right. I can see how that would be significant if you're just more geared toward looking ahead. I also know that I should really put some time toward these sort of studies as well. I'm always apprehensive because so many cultures and religions, have hijacked different things from each other, from one another, to suit their own needs, to suit their own culture. And so, everything just gets so distorted. It's hard to know what history you're really reading, of a people's. So I don't know. I guess I can kind of appreciate your sentiment in that regard. But yeah, I do think we do need to get more in touch with these sort of things. What sort of I don't know, what sort of feelings have you been getting toward this next season? Well, I know you have this show now, so I don't know, what are you looking toward? I could see there's a lot of potential merging with the place you work at, the yoga studio, and there's a lot of energy healing at that same location, right?
Yeah. I was actually thinking of a lot of people from the studio as wanting to interview people doing new paradigm violet flame healing. That's something I want to know more about myself, and I feel like it's something that not enough people know about, here in Chicago or even here in the United States. It's something that new paradigm healing, it is something that was actually brought in by a man named John Armitage, who actually I would love to be able to get for an interview. I believe he lives in France, but he channeled in this healing modality working with violet flame. And yes, he's not, the first person to channel in and work with violet flame, but the way that he channeled in the frequencies, from what I do understand, it's a Mahatma energy, and it works with more symbols than what is in actual Reiki, because I do absolutely love Reiki, and I love Reiki energy, Reiki frequency, and working with Reiki. But apparently Reiki only has, just, a handful of symbols. Even variations on Reiki usually work with under 10 symbols. And apparently Shambhala Reiki has, even, if I'm understanding it correctly, 352 symbols and sigils, and it's supposed to come from that very Shambhala frequency. And I guess it used to be called Shambhala Reiki, but for some reason there was an issue with the terminology and it got changed to new paradigm healing. And I've been dying to learn it. I just really want to learn it so much, but there always seems to be so many schedule conflicts. But I would just love to either interview John or interview Kevin, who is at the studio that I work at, who is a healer of many modalities, but he does specialize in the violet flame healing. So he's one of the people I've been meaning to contact. And of course, an interview about Kundalini with Karen Powell, the head of the yoga studio. And there's just so many other interesting modalities. I had this amazing healing maybe a month ago. I'm usually not one myself for receiving table healings, but I had this absolutely amazing healing with this fellow healer named Damien, and he does a lot of sound healing, but he also is very amazing with like Reiki and a modality of craniosacral. And I don't know much about craniosacral, but he merges both Reiki and craniosacral, and it was just an absolutely lovely experience. And I don't know, I'm just interested in like what he's doing with sound healing. And I have another friend who is there who does animal communication. And it's funny, I have two friends who do animal communication, and I do absolutely love animals. And one who actually, is around at the studio. I think she teaches Reiki there sometimes. And another friend who does animal communication who's in California. And I absolutely would love to either have them on at the same time and have a talk on animal communication and have some people call in and get some animal communication readings, or just see what are their techniques, or what can they tell people about how people can tune in not only to their own pets but to the animals around, if that all makes sense. Do you have any pets, Richard?
Yes. Currently, I have two cats. They're a little larger than some cats. They're like mixed with some Maine Coon in them, so a little extra fur and little extra wildness.
Yeah, I've heard of the Maine Coon cats. I had a very dear friend with a cat who was part Maine Coon, and she was a very big cat. She was sturdy and robust, to say the least. I think she had gotten to be a 20-pound cat, and so it was an amazing, wonderful cat that I love that cat. But it was like you could pretty much. I mean, I couldn't pick her up. She wouldn't let me. But I mean, she was sturdy. I don't know if I could have even lifted her. Are you able to pick yours up? Do you know how much they weigh?
Yeah. I don't know exactly, but the female, she's maybe somewhere in between 15 and 20. The male, he's at least 20. Maybe might even be pushing the scale past that. I'm not sure. It's so hard though. If one cat could stand to lose a few pounds, but you have two of them, how do you isolate? When you're feeding and that, you don't want to feed anyone less than they need. So, but they're both happy, healthy animals. And I used to have a couple of dogs. I took care of a couple dogs when I was a child, when I was younger, living at home. So I do appreciate the connection with animals, and it's the amount of communication and really information you can appreciate from, sharing a space, cohabitating with them, or just the kind of ways you can pick up on things from your surroundings that, we don't really notice as much as they might, in the surroundings.
Oh yes, yes. No, that is definitely true. So yeah, I feel like I could never have enough cats, but I only have two, and I absolutely love them. And yeah, they are a lot of time and energy, a lot of work, but I feel like if I could, if I had more time, or someone to help me clean up after them, I would want to have more. I just love them. You can never have enough cats. But they do have their own personalities. This is kind of, I don't know if this is off topic or on topic, but there have been people who have said that certain animals function off of a group mind or a hive mind. And I feel like that might be true off of animals that, travel in swarms, like swarms of bees or swarms of termites or swarms of butterflies, etc. And it is quite possible that they do function off of a group mind. Not that I see that it's proven or that I have a definitive answer, but I know one thing is I can say I don't think cats do at all. I can definitely say I do not think cats do, right?
Yeah, no, I'd have to second that. Yeah, I mean, they definitely each have very independent minds of their own. And yeah, sometimes you can persuade them a certain way or another, and sometimes you just have to let them do what they want. But
yeah, I think dogs as well. But no, that was just sort of off topic. But I was just thinking of certain animals, or if I could have that question answered through some animal communicators over like which animals actually do function off of group mind or hive mind and which don't, unless that is a myth. But I swear I've learned in an insect biology class that a lot of insects do function on that hive mind, and that's why they're able to cooperate so effortlessly. But another.
Yeah, no, that is a great other place to go. I mean, because when you mention insects, that makes me think of just how many different levels of consciousness and awareness we actually have that that exist here that we work with. We hear about the mind of an insect or the reptile brain, and then we have a lot of the mammalian brains seem a lot closer to ours. We talk about these different levels of consciousness and awareness, and then there are connections, of course, to a universal consciousness. How do you think this fits in the animal realm?
So, this is something I don't quite know. I know definitely cats and dogs are not functioning on a hive mind, and I don't know enough about farm animals or animals who have been domesticated to know, are they functioning in this level of individuation, or are they not? And I mean,
I guess I just mean more what your instincts have told you, have been telling you so far in life, toward these sort of, differences or how many different, how do you see things? That's, I guess, is really where I'm going.
Thinking about animal souls, and what I would not call myself an expert animal communicator by any means, but I do read the energy of animals, frequently in readings, both cats, dogs, rabbits, etc. And I have noticed that there are animals that do have younger souls, or more what people would call an animal soul. And then there's animals who are almost like a spirit guide embodied, where it's like they have this ancient, wise, complicated soul, and they're practically these spirit guides embodied. And so I feel like there's all different kinds out there. And with definitely with animal souls, which are individuated, I feel like there's a variance between like the younger souls, like, hey, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to be a dog, I'm going to play frisbee, to having this like almost like little ascended spirit guide that watches over people in crisis, people in turmoil, or just people in their day-to-day life, as an embodied spirit guide who are with people, or even an embodied teacher. So I just feel like there's definitely all different levels, and I do find that quite fascinating.
Well, I know I've always heard about how the ancient Egyptians worshipped cats in their society, sought them as, sort of on a higher level than they themselves were. And, well, I don't know. I definitely, having been a caretaker, owner of two cats here, can appreciate the majesty, I suppose, the majestic qualities of them. They are really unique in some of these ways. I often wonder, what sort of things compelled the Egyptians toward this way of thinking. I mean, what things about cats, do you think we're so singled out for a culture like that?
I'm not quite sure what was going on with cats in ancient Egypt. I mean, it could just be like the magic that we find today in cats. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are pretty transfixed or transpired by cats today too. So, I mean, it could be just that same magnetism or appeal that they have today that the ancient Egyptians saw in them. And, there's this feeling of, yes, like, let's worship them. Why not? Or it could be some very wise souls and wise spirit guides came in and actually were embodied through cats, because I've actually seen in readings that I've done on people who have, had a dog that passed or some kind of other, cat or dog or animal that have passed, and I'm reading the energies and I'm like, wow, it's like almost such an ancient soul. I've even seen a woman who has had, pet rats, and these pet rats were really wise and ancient, and losing one was, causing a lot of grief and a huge void. And so it's interesting, so I think that what could have happened in ancient Egypt is, maybe some of these really wise ascended souls came into, bodies of cats to be pets or spirit guides or leaders, etc. And, they just saw that and noticed that in enough, cats who had these incarnated wise souls, and figured all cats must be incredibly wise. I must say I've never met a cat that I didn't like, but I don't know. I've never worshipped one though. But, I guess there's still time, right?
Certainly. Always still time to worship cats here at Truth Cat Radio.
Oh my gosh. Well, I must, sorry. One more thing I must say about animals before I'm not quite sure if anyone about this veering or not, but one thing I will say is I have a really dear friend and her daughter with this pet rabbit, and this pet rabbit was literally born during the Lionsgate time in August. I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with the Lionsgate time, which happens every year, and it's around August 8th. And what happens is there's this absolutely beautiful it's just like this absolutely beautiful time where I think the stars and planet Sirius align with different constellations or aspects in our sky. And I think it also aligns with some kind of a pyramid in Giza. I'm not quite sure of what are all the technical aspects that like make it like a true Lionsgate portal opening, but there is this portal, I believe, that opens between Earth and star Sirius, and is a really powerful time of manifestation. Talking about putting something powerful in motion and cycles and patterns, that is a powerful time. If anyone is listening, and if there's anything positive you want to start and put in motion, I think August is such a powerful time to do that. That's when the Lionsgate happens each and every year. That's when this amazing rabbit was born with this crazy personality, this like unpredictable, very dramatic rabbit, if you can imagine a little fluffy black lop-eared rabbit that is so unpredictable and dramatic. But she was born during the Lionsgate a couple years ago, and just anything you're wanting to put in motion during that time is so powerful. In addition to like when there's a shooting star, like if you'd see a comet storm or a shooting star storm, that's another really powerful time to set things in motion. And that's a cliche. People always say wish upon a shooting star. But I remember in 2015, there was not only Lionsgate portal opening, but right around that time, there was some kind of prolonged meteor shower for about a week or two. And I feel like that was a huge time of manifestation. And I'm not quite sure if the same meteor shower does happen to different degrees in every August, but there is something like that to be said, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, it is also scientifically always pointed out that we ourselves are stardust. I mean, everything, all of the, essential elements that make up our bodies, I mean, these things were initially generated inside the, the nuclear process of the stars. And eventually it winds up in this form. So it shouldn't be that much of a stretch to understand how we could be still affected and connected to the whole cosmos and this different fluctuations in it. It always fascinates me with numbers as well. But you did also mention like readings. a couple minutes ago. And on that note, are you open to like, taking any callers if people want to
Oh,
call in with
certainly.
questions or?
Definitely. Definitely. I certainly am.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll just throw the number out there again to all the listeners. If anyone would like to call in, have any questions for Sava, or would like to get a reading, of some type, have some information they're interested in about themselves, that number would be 714-598-3125. That number again, 714-598-3125. You could also contact us on Skype. You would want to call Stephen D. Kelly. That's Stephen.D.Kelley on Skype. And he could connect you that way as well. So, if anyone is interested, I guess feel free. We'll open up the lines if anyone's curious about anything. Regarding some of the, readings that you've done, you were mentioning the topic of animals, but as far as just relations with any entities, I mean, I'm sure that's a common topic that comes up when people are coming for readings. A lot of people want to know about people who are dead, basically, relatives, or even things about past lives.
Yeah, I would definitely say that a specialty of mine would be past life readings and readings that are more in alignment with Akashic record readings, which would be, when I'm doing a past life reading on someone, like say, you, Richard, had some karma and you're like, why does this one habit or pattern? In fact, speaking about habits and patterns, so say you, Richard, were like, oh, why does this one habit and pattern always happen to me? Why am I, here's just an example. Why do I unconsciously, self-sabotage or screw myself over when big opportunities or really wonderful things come my way? And why do I do this to myself? Why am I unconsciously, undercutting myself or blocking myself from having this true amount of, prosperity that would be my divine birthright? And so say if you were wanting to look at how you can break out of that cycle or pattern, I would say like, okay, let's look through the layers of the aura, layers 1 through 8, and let's look at any baggage, trauma, soul fragments from any past lives. And we'll go through and look at any baggage, trauma, or soul fragments from any past lives. And we'll look at a past life for each of the 8 layers of the aura and then do healing on it. And if there's soul fragmentation, bring it back into present time. And then after looking at what is the past life with, the baggage or, toxicity, then clearing it, running some gold energy, bringing it, into present time and seeing like, what is the highest truth, to break out of that pattern. What is your soul's highest truth after you do break out of that pattern? And so, yes, doing those type of past life readings would be a specialty for me, but no, contacting people who have recently been dead, those type of things, is not something that I actually do often. It's something I do sometimes during readings. I find not so much my own clients, but when I do work sometimes on a psychic hotline, I will get people who call in and they want to ask about someone who's just passed on, etc. And I can tune into it clairvoyantly or sometimes get messages. But the way that my space is set, my mediumship is more for, like spirit guides, angels, star people, star beings, teachers or, like star teachers, that kind of an energy. And so my mediumship is set at a different frequency. So yes, I can tune into people who have, recently passed on, etc. But generally, when I'm interacting with discarnate entities in people's space, it's more with the intention of, sending them back to the light rather than, kind of communicating with them through trance mediumship, if that makes sense. But I mean, I will do it if the situation asks, but it's not one of my favorite things to do because it's set at a heavier frequency. Usually if someone has passed on and their soul hasn't traveled very far, the reason is because they have sadness, heaviness, unfinished business, and there's like a misalignment between their Earth personality and their eternal perspective. So they haven't been, willing to go back to, back home to their eternal perspective, their higher self, etc. So it's generally not one of my favorite things to do, but I will do it. Whereas past life readings, I do love and enjoy doing, if that all makes sense.
Okay, and yeah, and I understand. Well, no, I was going to say I'm curious to how conveniently the topic of patterns fit into that as well, because you were talking about the different reoccurring tendencies and patterns, that someone may have had that even trace back to other lives, that are just fundamentally, let's see what things can be identified here that we need to change, that what is the common thread that, you keep doing wrong, even if you did, a lot of different things along the way in your lifetime. There might be some identifiable similarities you're not catching, and looking into this further back, temporally speaking, I guess you could call it. Yeah, it could really give a lot more insight into that sort of thing. But yeah, this is another example of patterns then, isn't it? I mean, the tendencies we have, some are good, some are bad, some are work, for us or against us. Stephen likes to use the term light worker a lot. And I don't know, I imagine from the way you speak of things that you could appreciate this sort of term to explain things as well. Am I right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I do really like that term. And I hadn't always understood it even until a couple of years ago. And then when I got that understanding of it, I was like, yes, I love this terminology. And yes, I do think it is an amazing terminology, and it is a wonderful thing, to be in that vein and in that intention. And I feel like to be a light worker, it doesn't just mean that you are working in the field of energy healing, but I think the true form of light worker has to do with your intention. It's just like if someone is even a doctor or a nurse or a policeman, and they're not necessarily working in the energy fields, they could be termed a light worker if their heart and their intention is in the right place, if their true desire is to serve and to anchor in light. Or a lot of people even have resistance to people in the church, but if there is someone, in the church who is genuinely good, and which I believe there are many people, like that, so in a church, synagogue, or, other religious institution, and they're really there to help the community and bring in the light, they're a light worker too. I mean, it doesn't just have to be, people in New Age professions, and, not everybody in New Age professions can call themselves a light worker, even though they may want to, they may have an idea of, oh, I'm an energy healer, so it makes me a light worker. But for someone to truly be a light worker, it's like, it has, I feel like, to do with their true intention to serve and to anchor in more light, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it really has to do with what their their real purpose is. If it's just completely self-serving, very much based on like materialism and greed, and just very, very inward exclusively. It really wouldn't qualify. It's really someone who's giving more. I know Stephen will also bring up just the option, really, someone can, accept of really giving more than 50% of your time to serve others, as service to others rather than service to self, for at least like, say 51 or more percent of your time on average, at least as a goal. Some people that might not always reach that all the time. I think that kind of defines light worker as well. I'm not sure that I'm at that stage. I know hosting a show, I'm, not trying to gain from it in any way, other than, giving back, to the people. So I like to think of this as like one form that I can at least contribute to that. But I don't know, you might be further along than I am on that path. I think it's just a continual challenge, perhaps. But yeah, I think a lot of people out there, they might even be healers in some way or another, with different mediums, but they could just really be in it for the money or their ego, right? I'm sure you've come across the differences in some of these different people out there.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with an author, Joshua David Stone, but he was actually one of the premier authors of the quote unquote New Age. And with Joshua David Stone, he in one of his books had this really interesting term, and I think he called it shadow workers. And he was talking about people who, are working in the quote unquote energy medicine or light working professions, but they do have, again, like an alternate agenda or ego, or they could genuinely believe that they are of the light, but then they could end up being very vindictive or, have, a vengeful streak or, hold on to grudge and resentment. And so there is definitely a lot to unpack around that terminology for sure, I can say.
You'll get some of these mega theater or like mega tent preachers, who will go on the road or have these congregations where it just gets really out of control, and they clearly are at a point where they're not serving their congregation whatsoever, but they'll still maybe believe that they really are. I know a quote of one journalist I keep up with. Well, at least he always reiterates the quote that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I mean, that is an issue. The more someone has, including success in this sort of work, the more it could be a threat to compromising what they're really after, right?
Yeah. Well, I do feel like it can be a very double-edged sword, because when people give so much and then they give too much, they may give to the point of resentment. And then all of a sudden they're giving to this point that they find that they're resentful and have a chip on their shoulder, because it's like they have been giving too much, or they may get depleted and sick. And then after they get depleted and sick, then they're feeling resentful and get this chip on the shoulder. And then it detracts from your true intention of being able to be, clear channel or light worker. So if you're giving too much and you start out with that genuine, big heart, and you just want to give, and then you give too much and then you deplete yourself, it can also cause a pullback or resentment, or it can cause a situation where, people become purely concerned with the money or financial aspect, and they could have a great deal of technical skill and expertise, but they're devoid of, what are their true spiritual reasons that they were getting into the field in the first place. So I just feel like the pendulum can swing either way. I feel like there's dangers of being too far in either direction, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't really like to spend a lot of time on different denominations when we speak about a lot of these things either. I mean, I think the term light worker, or like, some sort of energy healing, metaphysical healer can apply to a lot of forms and cultures, and that includes a lot of religious beliefs as well. There are a lot of things that can be similar, but different enough because of the culture it comes from. So I don't think it's worth getting too hung up on these differences. I'm sure that most are similar enough, where it's really getting in touch with what we as humans evolved here with, as far as tools at our disposal. I mean, a lot of these comes from the mind's power itself for manifestation. And a lot of people, well, I mean, these days we're not in touch with that as much, right? I mean, people speak of just so many little things that used to be more sensitive, like that the hair, used to be able to sense, just a greater etheric kind of energy that's all around us. The hair follicles themselves, or we hear about the pituitary gland, having such a third eye into the Akashic knowledge and to ourself. But I don't know. I think it's good to compare a lot of cultures to gain more insight, into the common threads, because that's where you can find the real powers that we've lost, I think, in the modern age.
Oh, certainly. I do completely agree with that. And but that could be also interesting. Speaking of like patterns and cycles, I think that's something that needs to be watched out for light workers, is the pattern or habit of giving too much or giving too much of oneself, and then if that habit or pattern gets taken too far, then it can swing to that end of the pendulum of someone, feeling like withholding or feeling resentful or continuing to give, but giving with a chip on their shoulder. And so that's a habit and pattern that I think is, I guess worth looking at or noting. And, what what other kinds of habits and patterns can you think of that are coming up for you? I feel like there's a lot, but I was just wondering if you had any specific direction that you'd like to veer things.
Oh, well, regarding me in particular, I don't know. I have had a number of years ago a handful of readings from this one woman. I don't know her exact age, but she was a bit on in her years. I want to say she was probably at least in her 80s. She was a bit up there, but she had a rather strong gift, even at that age. And I guess I didn't really ask too much information, but in some conversations she revealed a few vague things to me. I've still been wondering about some things, but I think I don't know. I've always been wary about asking too many questions. I've always been welcoming information someone gives me that they can see. But I've always felt it's most useful as you go through life to try to figure out a lot of these things, as the time unfolds, and you don't want to ask too much as well. I'm sure you get every type of person, though. You'll get people who ask a lot of questions and some who are hesitant as to what they want to ask you, right?
Yeah, I feel like I get two very distinctive type of people. Like there's people who are so inquisitive that they just ask so many questions and such detailed questions. And sometimes it'll be a question that's like a good paragraph. And I'm like, whoa, like what, like this is a very multifaceted question. There's a lot to unpack here. So sometimes it's a question like that. And sometimes it is a kind of question of, where someone's just like, okay, just look at my space and tell me what's going on with me. And so I have very extreme, type of people, I guess you could say, patterns of people who come to me for readings. It comes in waves, and there's people who say, absolutely nothing. And I'm like, okay, just read me. Or people will have such a complicated, multifaceted, set of questions that just to be able to wrap your mind around what the questions are that they're actually asking and figure out a way to integrate that in the layers of the aura and then see each facet within a reading that can be a deal of its own, if that all makes sense. And so I do feel like with these questions, it's very important to really be able to listen closely and understand like what underneath all the words the person is really, really wanting to see. Because sometimes around like a big loquacious question, there's just something very simple like, does this person, still love me? Or I need some reassurance before I make a change in my career, if that all makes sense.
I was a little taken aback by this whole affiliation that developed for me with Truth Cat Radio, because that was something I really didn't plan much too far in advance. When things did really start formulating, and I don't know, a lot of times in our life, I think a lot of things can wind up that way. We don't fully see some of the upcoming cycles until we're already a bit into them, and they're really gaining momentum already and have already, well since begun. And I did think of some things that I heard from this one older woman I mentioned, from readings from many years ago, actually. And I just noticed how now, of course, a lot more people are hearing, my voice, my opinions with the show and everything, both live and the archives and all that. And, I don't know, it just seemed like it really rang true to something really vague she was touching on, but didn't really want to give me more information than I was asking for, about reaching people or touching or influencing, making it sound like there were large numbers and this sort of thing. And at the time, I had no idea what she was referring to. I had considered music in the past, but I had moved so far away from anything that would gain large audience or for anything like that. I couldn't really figure out what she was referring. So I don't know. It does feel a little strange with a bit of karma for me with this show. I've always appreciated Gnosticism, and mysticism, the preserving of both these different metaphysical powers and just knowledge in general, that might be more esoteric or hard for most to digest and to preserve for the future. But I don't know. I think I have a lot more work to do to get to any worthwhile goals. But I do have a strong interest in Reiki, Sava. I have considered trying to go about studying Reiki, but I haven't begun that yet.
If you ever get to study Reiki, the place that I studied was at a place called Zanti, and it's around Irving Park and Western, and here in Chicago, and it's just such a fun it's got such a fun vibe. Like, I remember I've been there for the Reiki 1 and 2, and I went there even a few years back for this like intuitive class, and it has this like really like, I don't know, it's just a fun vibe, and I do feel like it's just like a really cozy environment to learn. And so they also teach it at Satnam, which I know would be wonderful. I've never trained there because I had already had my mastership when I came to Satnam. But that first Reiki place that I did discover was Zanti. And I know that just like it has this like very group atmosphere, like fun vibe, like, everyone brings food. It's kind of like a potluck, and I think they order usually from some kind of really nice Middle Eastern restaurant. It's just like a nice, I don't know, it's just a nice vibe for Reiki. It's really like laid back, but it gives you an opportunity to not only practice your healing but to assimilate the information. And then they do Reiki shares, like about every 3 months or so afterwards. So it's a really cool thing. I think you might enjoy that if you're able to get down there and study. Another thing about habits and patterns and cycles that I wanted to share before I forgot, because this came up while we were discussing something else.
Well, actually, Sava, maybe that would be best right after the break. Looks like it's 5 minutes to the hour. I should probably take a little quick break here, and maybe we could do that as soon as we pick up at 8 o'clock or 9.
Oh, certainly. Okay. That sounds great.
All right. Yeah. So if there's anything you need to do for like 5 minutes or so, if you want to just mute, and I will in a second as well.
I will have a cup of tea. All right. See you in 5 then.
Okay. Great. Well, everyone, you are listening to Truth Cat Radio at truthcatradio.com. This is Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary. We're speaking with Sava Wolf tonight, and stick around. At the top of the next hour, we have Stephen D. Kelly with the Stephen D. Kelly Show coming up right after my show. So, we do appreciate everyone who's tuning in. Please help out if you can and support the station. Once again, if someone wants to call in during the second hour, that call-in number will be 714-598-3125. That number again, 714-598-3125. I know we've had some callers in past shows for Sava.
I'm ready here for it if you want.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Anyway, yes, of course, this is Truth Cat Radio, www.truthcatradio.com, and I'll make this quick, but we are 100% listener-supported radio, so those of you that are listening out there, thank you for listening, and please continue to do what you can to help us out. And once again, shout out to the people over there at Wolf Spirit. Okay, it looks like we've got quite a few people out there. Anyway, we got a good little selection there, Richard. Anyway, I want to say in about an hour, my show is going to come up, and that is going to be titled The Babylonian Death Cult Must End. That's the show's title tonight. Anyway, I hope you guys will enjoy that one. And that'll be the end of our live broadcasting. But that comes on at 10 p.m. Eastern, and it's over at midnight. And then we don't come back until Monday, when we start at 6 p.m. Eastern with Violet Vision with Sava here, Sava Wolf. And then right after Sava at 8 p.m. Eastern is Shimamura with Metaphysics and More. And at 10 p.m. Eastern is Joan of Angels with her show, Angel Essence. And on Tuesdays, it's Daryl Nichols, and he's on at 8 p.m. Eastern. And right after Daryl is Dave Robbins and Mystic Freedom. That's at 10 p.m. Eastern. And on Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern is Freedom of Joyce with Terry Joyce, which brings us back, of course, to Thursday, which starts at 4 p.m. Eastern with David Simpson at Dawn Best Hour, and then at 6 with Graham Sutherland, and Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary here at 8. And we also want to remind everybody, please, if you have not done it, please join our Facebook page. Okay, it's very important. And also, if you are listening to this on a YouTube, would you please give us a nice thumbs up, a nice comment, and share it with your friends. Okay, very, 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 very appreciative if you guys could do that. If you want to help us out economically, which is something that we constantly need, please go to our main page at www.truthcatradio.com and find the PayPal address, which is stephenkelly714@gmail.com, and it will be listed under a button that says support us. And right next to that button, of course, is a chat room. If you have not discovered the chat room, go in there and register a screen name and say hello. There's lots of fun people in there. Shout out to everybody in the chat room. Hi, Lee. And beyond that, if you would like to call in, as Richard said, the phone number is area code 714-598-3125. And you're all welcome. If you're outside the United States and you don't want to go that route, feel free to send me a contact request at Skype. And you're going to need to send that to Stephen.D.Kelly. That's STEVEN.D.Kelley. And make sure you say that you want to be on the show so I know enough to connect you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and return it over to Richard. And I want to remind everybody that it is June 22nd, 2017. And this is Truth Cat Radio. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Stephen. And welcome back, everyone. The time is now 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's East Coast, USA. As Stephen pointed out, this is Truth Cat Radio at truthcatradio.com. And you're listening to Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary. Tonight we have Sava Wolf, who's returned to the program and who is joining the Truth Cat Radio staff with her own show on Mondays, Violet Vision. Be sure to check out Violet Vision. And that's 5 p.m. Eastern on Mondays, Truth Cat Radio at truthcatradio.com. Yeah, we do look forward to her addition to the station. I know we're all very pleased about that. So I wanted to be the first person, of course, to to get to interview her. Now that she started hosting with our station, and well, I'd meant to do this actually before that began anyway. But anyone who does want to call in, as Stephen was saying, please do through Skype or through the call-in number. And, you know, Sava will be happy to answer any questions you have. I know a lot of people out there like to get a little information, a little more insight into their lives. They might be a little hesitant, but I know we have listeners, and there have been some in the past who have called in for just this sort of show. So please feel free, anyone who's hesitant. You know, we're welcoming calls tonight. Hello, Sava. I don't mean to rush you. Are you able to come back?
Oh, yes. I was swinging a cup of tea as you were speaking, but it is the perfect timing. So,
Excellent.
hello.
Hello. Great. You know, well, just before the break, I was talking about, your question to me, you know, about upcoming cycles or patterns for myself. And I mentioned considering beginning to learn Reiki healing. You gave me some advice on that, but you had some other things that came to mind regarding cycles and patterns. You think it could be important to share with the audience. I don't know, where were you thinking of going when you brought that up?
Oh, yeah. Well, I will say one thing I will say is that you were speaking about wanting to use Reiki healing in order to potentially break out of some cycles and patterns. And I actually think that is a really excellent idea, because using Reiki healing in order to break out of old cycles, habits, and patterns, you're literally with energy healing, with frequency rays, helping to break up old stagnant energies, you know, in the layers of the aura, in the layers of the chakra, within the body channels. And so it's almost like going about doing it manually. It's almost like you can think of it as an energy surgery, so to speak. So you definitely will be able to blow through a lot of, you know, any old energy that's not in present time, and using Reiki healing to shift it will be a wonderful, you know, kind of pleasant and gentle, non-effort way. Another thing that I was thinking about, cycles, habits, and patterns, were actually, it's something I do. It's called a symbols of the soul reading, where I look at the 7th layer of the aura, which is where the, you know, connection and interface between body and spirit is. And I look at the collections of symbols in one's aura. And so say, you know, you, Stephen, I was going to be looking at your 7th layer of the aura and take a look at what are these symbols that you've had and that you've acquired through all of these past lives. And I'm like, okay, maybe you have had a handful of symbols where it's almost like a symbol is like a badge, just like you would imagine like a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout badge. You have to go through a certain amount of lifetimes or a certain amount of energetic lessons in order to have a symbol appear in the 7th layer. So maybe you've had like a symbol of a firefighter's hat, and it wouldn't necessarily mean that you've had so many past lives as a firefighter literally, but this could symbolically mean you've helped people to put out fires, to put out dangerous situations, you know, to to keep the peace. It's like you've been an energetic firefighter, or you've literally helped to contain the element of fire. And so that firefighter hat could be a symbol, or there can be, again, that very basic symbol of a crown, like a king's crown, you know, obviously a certain amount of past lives, and, you know, healing and relationship, or someone can have a court symbol, whereas like they've had many past lives where they're using humor in order to entertain the crowd and help them to forget troubled times, or literally past lives as a comedian, or, you know, using jest and, you know, funniness and play in order to detract from like, you know, heavy mood, sadness, seriousness, with this like lighter, more humorous energy. And so for like symbols reading, you can actually look at what are the symbols and patterns that you've had as an actual soul and an eternal being, and what are the ones that you've completed, and then you can look into the future and say, what are the ones I'm working on now? So that's kind of a way to think about it and look at it in a more eternal perspective, if that all makes sense.
And regarding, well, different levels of the chakras, I don't know, you've given a lot of readings that are rather detailed, right? Where it actually covers these different layers.
Yeah, it's just looking through aspects of the energetic anatomy. It's just like how if someone is, you know, detail cleaning a car, it's like, you know, you can get into every crevice, and you might think, oh, this is just like a dark crevice or a random crevice. And then you get in there and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I just found like, you know, $20 in change and gum wrap and my old license, you know, like it's just like in a layer of an aura, just like when you're detail cleaning a car. Is like if you get into some of these more obscure places, like, oh, let's get into the, you know, 4th ring of your, you know, 8th chakra. What is in there? You know, what is the information that wants to be seen? What is the information that wants to unravel? And so I feel like, really not being afraid to look, to look in all of these obscure places, and not only not being afraid, but also being persistent and not being lazy, and just being like, okay, let's look a little further, or let's look a little deeper, if that all makes sense.
I always, I'm hesitant to try to ask too much information, as I was saying, but I don't know, maybe I should try to break out of that a little. I do want to encourage out there, once again, if anyone does want to call in, I don't know if we don't, until we get a caller, you know, who has some questions or anything. I guess at the moment, we could talk about me a bit I don't know, what would you see in my chakra layers if you could, you know, examine them a bit?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What direction would you like to go? Would you like me to look at a couple layers and just take a look at what are any old energy patterns you're wanting to release and clear, and what is it that you would like to anchor in for the future?
Yeah, in general, yeah, both of those dynamics, yeah, I mean, are interest to me, definitely. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So one thing I'm seeing around your third chakra, third layer of the aura, and that is a place of personal power, balance of masculine and feminine energies, and it is also a place of being able to connect in with your Akashic records. And what I'm seeing is there's a subconscious habit and pattern that you have of taking on a lot of other people's stuff. I just see this image where like people will interact with you and I see them coming by you and it's almost like they're putting these like crumpled up pieces of paper or like crumpled up, they look almost like old crumpled up pieces of newspaper. So it's almost like people are clearing their old news and kind of like heaping it on you or piling it on you. And so what is this old news coming through is like this old energy or like old news. So it's like old baggage that they have. And I feel like there's people in your life that you've been kind of open to interacting with who have, in a sense, dumped some of their old baggage on you. And so some of your personal power gets tied up just kind of like handling or cleaning up other people's like old business or old baggage, if that all makes sense. And it's something that ties up a good deal of your time and energy that you're taking this on at the subconscious level, almost like kind of energetically cleaning up after everyone's mess, and it's not giving you as much of a free hand to be able to create, because I do see this very like artistic energy around you, almost like an energy of like a jack of all trades or like a Renaissance man. It's like you have many talents. It's like there's this multifaceted aspects of talent that really want to come out and want to come to the foray, but it's like your hands are so full of like other people's like old news, old business that they're clearing, if that all makes sense to you.
Sometimes the information and interactions, experiences with people can really lead to affecting how we perceive ourselves in different facets and different ways, and ultimately how we see ourselves, and how well motivated, positive or negative toward things. But I mean, it could lead a lot, I guess, to how how it affects our potential for things, right? I mean, how we perceive aspects of ourselves. Sometimes there's guilt that we transcend to ourselves. We might not, I guess, even realize. You suppose it just like can be unconsciously associated through the kind of information, experience, things you just can't shake. Maybe there's even positive or negative images from people you've interacted with in the past. And yeah, I can sometimes feel like, I see myself in ways I don't need to, and it doesn't necessarily help me for the future. So I don't know. A lot of that does ring true to what you say.
Yeah. And a lot of times when people are empathic and intuitive, they'll unintentionally take on someone else's guilt, or there will be that, interaction or aspect with another person that is like you just can't seem to shake it or let it go. And it's like very much so their old energy caught up in your space. So I feel like for you, especially since you do interface with so many people on a regular basis, just, cleansing your aura regularly through sound healing or more meditation, or, even getting to yoga or gong, or, putting on some frequency music or even binaural beats. I believe there's actually a place, I think there's either a place or a meetups in Chicago where, I don't know if it's a Monroe Institute meetup or something, but there is something like that for binaural beats. But that's another place or way using those binaural beats to clear your energy field and to like let go of old habits and patterns. So that's one thing that I am seeing in you. Another image that I'm seeing has to do with a habit or pattern, and it has to do with you owning your crown chakra and also owning your own seniority. I just see this image where it looks like, okay, this is an image analogy for you being able to own your own crown chakra. This has to do with the seventh chakra, seventh layer, and I just see this image of you like wanting to give yourself permission to have more of a sense of inner authority, to wear your crown chakra, to own your crown chakra. And I just see you with this crown, and it's like you'll start to put it on your head, but you almost feel like you're not supposed to. It's like you almost feel like you have to sneak and have inner authority, or that you're not supposed to have inner authority, or if you do have inner authority, you better lay low and just fly under the radar. And when another male comes around you that has like a strong dominant energy, there's like a strong kind of like bossy dominant energy around some other males in your environment. And when this happens, it's like you automatically like feel like scared or frightened and let your crown fly off. It's like literally almost like losing, autonomy on your crown chakra. And it's this feeling of like not feeling comfortable owning your crown chakra, around men who have more of this like overt or dominant energy. And I feel like it's coming from a lot of past lives of not being safe around men or like male authority figures who had a lot of power, whether that was through political systems, whether it was in the family system or even in the workspace, if that all makes sense.
Okay, no, it's very layered, and there's a lot of different things, I guess, that could go into being analyzed there. But no, I mean, it's very valuable information for me to consider further there. Yeah, it's definitely a lot for me to contemplate more a bit later tonight or sometime. But no, well, thank you for that. I also was just going to mention how I notice a lot of people can, with cycles and patterns in the points in their life, through the weeks and months, can go through, I think, a lot of, well, rather dormant, almost like a hibernating, gathering, re-energizing sort of stage, and then also, a more outward, releasing of energy and creativity sort of active phase after that. And these can be necessary, perhaps, is what I suggest, that it's not something that we can do away with. We have to accept that those, both of those are necessary. And then some people, I think, at the end of these creative, like, outward expellings of energies, will tend to sometimes go habitually into like a bit of, a self-destructive phase of one form or another. For some people, they think of like this as their vice or that, and, something they might try to avoid, but every so often, they give into and they try to get out of there. But I don't know, in one way or another, do you think some of these self-destructive points and cycles are sometimes embedded too into just our human nature that we can't completely avoid as well?
I do feel like a lot of times self-destructive impulses can be, in a sense, wanting to take a stance of empowerment in a very roundabout way. I'm seeing one aspect, but I've seen a lot of people with some self-destructive tendencies where there's been people who have been sabotaged by external influences time and time again, whether it's, literal negative energy against them, a political figure sabotaging them, or a family figure sabotaging them, a business partner sabotaging, a love partner, whatever. So when people have experienced a great deal of sabotage and calamity in either their present life or in their past life history, and then they come to a point where they're free and clear to create what they want to create for themselves, there's still post-traumatic stress and a fear that some other force or element is going to come and sabotage and take away what they've worked so hard to build up. So rather than allowing an external force, whether it's a lover, a family member, a political system, a work partner, whatever, to come and sabotage you and take it all away from you, at a subconscious level, it's like, okay, it's going to get taken away from me. It's going to get sabotaged. So I might as well have a hand in it and do it my own way. So sometimes this self-destructive impulses can be a twisted energy of just wanting to have some control or empowerment or autonomy. So that could be one aspect of it. Another aspect of having self-destructive patterns and influences can be, oh, well, I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. I wouldn't be able to maintain it, and I would just, screw it up or mess it up anyways if I built it up to, its peak or its entirety. So if I destroy it, when it's at 70 or 80%, then I won't have to worry about the grief and disappointment of messing it up at 100%. And so there's a few different, reasons, but I feel like those are two of the most common that I've seen in the healing work that I've done, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. And then in terms of energy polarity, for that concept, well, if someone were in a destructive phase that were, actually doing some sort of harm to others, then of course, that would be negative energy. But if this is self-destructive, that's only to oneself in some way or another, whether psychologically or physically or some combination. I don't know. What is it necessarily in the same category? It seems like it's not in quite the same category of negative energy, at least not in quite as severe a category. Or would that even be negative energy at all? Or is this just sometimes necessary in cycles that we have?
I feel like a lot of self-destructive patterns are related to post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it's not necessarily, that there's a malicious intent, but it just comes from post-traumatic stress that is still being held at a subconscious level. And, if you think about it, if you ever wonder, what is the population percentage of who is really dealing with post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorders and syndromes, and thinking about, okay, like how many people are walking around with a lot of PTSD on their shoulders, for whatever reason. And I do feel like, again, like unconsciously, sabotaging oneself is definitely a facet of that, if that makes sense.
I feel like even the mood you allow yourself to get in, can just be a strong example of self-destructive. It doesn't have to be, actually doing some form of physical harm to yourself or anything. I mean, just if someone lets themselves get too worked up and angry over anything and everything, or stressed, through every moment of their day, irritated by everything, bothered by everything, they're just making themselves perceive life as something they don't appreciate, or as discomfort itself. I mean, that even in itself, I think perception can even be self-destructive if not applied well. So I don't know. I think of a lot of forms of I guess self-destructive can cover a lot of things. But someone could just maybe have not non-productive. Very much focusing on lower vibrations, and rather than something transcending that, as far as their focus, maybe with their time too. At times, people can have in their cycles, things they aspire to more, or things they can't seem to ever get away from at times that they, I don't know. It's hard to understand, what we need to really weed out of our life completely, and what things we just have to keep in balance and understand what their role is,
Oh, certainly. Well, yeah, I do think also a lot of times when there can be a fine line between people who have had a lot of trauma and post-traumatic stress, and then they get into a pattern of hypervigilance. And sometimes a pattern of hypervigilance can actually keep you safe if you are in genuinely dangerous circumstances. But sometimes when the danger is gone and you're still in a place of hypervigilance, then you can unconsciously create circumstances that will make you actually need to be hypervigilant. And so it is one of those things where it can be a sticky wicket. Like, say if someone is living in a war-torn country, or their family has been stricken by poverty and they're living in a very genuinely dangerous neighborhood, and they have to be hypervigilant each and every day. Like, okay, am I going to be attacked? Is my house going to be bombed? Am I going to be robbed or raped? And you have to be hypervigilant, be always checking your surroundings, because there actually is danger present. And then say, 5 years later, there's a completely different scenario and things are safe, everything is good. But that same hypervigilance and that same cycle of hypervigilance that once kept you safe and alive and well is now serving to detract from the quality of life and make you afraid of people who could be potential friends, or making enemies out of people who could be potential friends, if that all makes sense.
I was mentioning earlier just my connection to the role of the Gnostic or the mystic. And I know it's kind of a lofty thing, to aspire toward as far as a role goes. But well, I can't help but see that there's a I don't know, a tendency that you really need to work toward being able to achieve, just this perception to be on, to not take sides really or have enemies. Now this is another thing actually that Stephen speaks about. He's very knowledgeable on this topic as well. To even be able to love your enemies, to really get to a higher level metaphysically. I mean, you can't really be taking sides anymore. You have to see everyone's role in what needs to happen and transpire on this planet now, for everyone, and what they will and will not go through or achieve in this lifetime. Everyone's at different levels, but they all need to experience what they are, for them and for the collective, consciousness. But yeah, it's really hard to get to a place where even the ones you completely wouldn't approve of, say like war criminals or just, excessively greedy, banker types or something, and, who just hate humanity and, do everything that you would despise, even to those individuals to not wish the worst, rather to sit on the sidelines and just be there to offer help and aid to all humanity, almost like what the doctor's oath is supposed to be. I think that's the most difficult level to really achieve for the role of the Gnostic or mystic. That's something that I guess I would see myself as still striving toward, but it just seems, like I said, a lofty goal. But so, I mean, I guess that's part of what light worker can mean in my definition of the term.
Yeah, I was just saying how one can get overbalanced too far in the other direction. And I just feel like, how to keep it real and not to get too spun out into one end of the spectrum or one, cycle of seeing and being or another, if that all makes sense.
Yes, it does. Sometimes, it can be difficult to choose how to divide one's time, assuming someone has a few different roles they're trying to fit or fill and rotate between. But I don't know. I suppose sometimes someone can perhaps lose themselves in all of that, and they'll neglect enough of something that that starts building up. It could lead to anxiety or frustration because they're not giving enough time for, just all the sides of themselves, without realizing, that they're neglecting an important facet, an important dimension of themselves, right?
Yeah, well, actually, that brings to mind something interesting, and it has more to do with, not to say nationalistic cycles, but cycles that happen in different parts of the world. And I do remember being in college in an art class, and the theme of the art class was, Eastern art meets Western art, or East meets West. It is interesting in the Western world and talking about like cycles, habits, and patterns going kind of far or going to an extreme. In the Western world, there definitely is a really, really strong emphasis on this cycle or habit or pattern of like individuality at all costs, or individuality to the extreme, where the actual teacher was, he was of Japanese descent, but he was very familiar with like the sensibilities of the Eastern world, both, Japan, China, Korea. And there was not only was it very family oriented and ancestrally oriented, but community oriented. And it was talking about a lot of like art and artistic expression that was coming out from the Eastern world. And it was this habit and pattern of like being at one or being in unison. And they were using as an example, this is a couple years ago, and I think this is when it was the Olympics were in Beijing or somewhere around there, and it was showing a performance that was done with either all of these Chinese Chinese like dancers or acrobats, and it was this absolutely rigorous training and like rigorous performance, and for everyone to operate and function in unison, it was just gorgeous and almost like chilling to see how this whole group was almost like functioning on what you would say like group mind or hive mind, and a lot of the individuality was suppressed just in order to put on this like gorgeous spectacle or show, as a performance for some of the intermission of Olympics. And it was like everyone was letting go of individuality in order to create for this larger whole. And then there was a lot of other examples in East Asian art, which showed again this feeling or sensibility of like letting go of one's individuality in order to kind of dissolve into the greater whole and create something larger than oneself. And so I was just thinking about those two cycles kind of taken to the extreme, one in the Western sensibility and one in the Eastern world, one of like raw individuality and one of kind of like sacrificing individuality in order to absorb into the greater whole and create something larger than oneself, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be like hyper collectivism to describe it, but there's in the Japanese example, there wasn't so much an embracing of the individual in the extreme, but the collective and losing the individual. So they felt that the individual was already given too much attention. Is that it?
Somewhat. My teacher, he was of Japanese descent, but a lot of the art that we looked at was actually coming out of China, which is actually really, really fascinating and interesting because in China there is a certain level of censorship, at least, several years ago when I had taken that class, and there was a certain level of censorship, and it was like coming out of a time where art was heavily censored and there wasn't able to be as much of an artistic output. And then there was this time now for like the last several years where art has really been flourishing in China, and it's such an enormous country that is like, it's amazing what art is coming out. And it's interesting because as more and more artistic expression is coming out in China, and there is this interface between like Eastern and Western worlds, especially when it comes to artistic sensibilities, there is some movement from that space of collectivism and sacrificing the self to be a part of the greater whole to starting to incorporate, some of those elements of like Western sensibility and raw individualism. So it's just interesting like how the polarities of those cycles are mixing, at least when it comes to personal expression, the art world, even when it comes to personal expression, so I just thought it was very, very interesting, like the extremes and the polarities of those two different type of cycles as it goes to a more I don't know if you say like national or continental space, if that all makes sense.
Well, yes, definitely. I mean, in the East, the Eastern world, communism and socialism are even embraced more, at least by more governments. We can't say for sure if the people prefer them all or not, but at least it's more prevalent, a lot of those forms of society. And I have heard criticisms from Asian culture, constructive criticisms of Western culture that there is an overdeveloped sense toward the individual and exerting your energy and your time and focus in your lifetime toward your individualism to such an extent, though, that the culture as a whole doesn't, progress to its utmost, if we're aspiring toward like a Star Trek, sort of a future for our society, like, how much we can accomplish by at least putting our energies together to some extent, rather than being so caught up in the individual that you spend all your time, effort, materials, energy, mostly on just these, egotistical, perhaps, rather than, ultimately productive pursuits. So it's sort of a criticism of the individual like that. But at the same time, I've also heard the West described as having like the most altruism in trying to look out for, everyone, that in all forms of life, and that in an excessive sense more than a lot of other cultures will in the East and so forth, and Middle East. So I don't know. It's there are opinions both directions on that. We weren't trying to get too political here, but I guess you can't help but include everything a little bit. But I guess it is important for that balance. And some cultures, well, see, I don't know. In the West, I can see maybe there may be already being a bit excessive hyper individuality, at times where in some ways you need to appreciate. But I'm surprised in Japan that they would feel the need to detract so much from the individual when it seems like there's a very collectivist culture in Asia to begin with. Perhaps not as much in Japan as in a lot of other Asian countries, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, I definitely feel like Japan is one of the countries in East Asia which has indeed interfaced the most with the Western world. But I do think that's interesting just in general, knowing a lot of people in the United States who are from foreign countries, whether it's Europe, South America, or Asia. But in other countries, there is a really strong emphasis over family and family unit. And I feel like within the United States, one thing that is interesting, and sometimes it can be refreshing, sometimes it can be unsettling, depending on which way you look at it, is that feeling of individual over the family. And so it's like there is really no right and no wrong. It's just different perspectives and different ways of, experimenting with life. But I do find that interesting of like a lot of people and individuals I know who, come to the United States from different countries, and they're noticing, in the United States, there is such an emphasis on individual over the family, whereas in other countries, there tends to be more of like emphasis on like family unit over individual. And, both, can have benefits, can have benefits and detriments. And I feel like for my personal history, I, definitely came from a very, very small family and an only child, with divorced parents who had so much individuality. They were almost like too much radically individual people to be, in a relationship or in too much of a family setting. And I would say even my, grandmother, bless her heart, she was also very radically individualistic and liked to do things her own way. And it was like coming from that conditioning of like everybody is so individualistic, they're off doing their own thing and not really, spending that much time in the collective. And then my own spiritual programming, where there's been a lot of lifetimes as, a Buddhist monk, a Tibetan monk, a Catholic nun, and working in these like communal spaces where, it's like no identity, but working for the greater good. It's almost like, different ancestral programming, different spiritual programming. And throughout my life, I've gravitated. I was almost raised or conditioned to be more radical individual. And then when I slip back into my own like spirit's normal ways, it was like this feeling of, being a raindrop that dissolves into the ocean and just kind of putting my energy into the collective, or just living and existing for the collective rather than for my own purposes. And when I did that, it was like really easy to slip into, but then I found that I wasn't as successful in my life, or wasn't, really hitting goals in my personal life. And then I had to kind of rein it back in and get back into that more individualistic space. So I feel like what comes maybe more naturally to me is dissolving into that greater whole and being kind of identityless, kind of, a drop in the ocean. But I feel like what tends to work best, at least living in this American society and, wanting to make it in life, is like, I guess, reining it back into a more individualistic cycle, if that all makes sense.
You did mention the pendulum earlier as well. So yeah, perhaps, there has to be a bit of a swing back and forth between the focus a bit more on the individual over these other factors taking precedence. But well, I suppose it's all necessary. So I don't know. So some people can get caught up on, just how much they interpret it as being self-serving or not. I mean, the focus on individualism, and then of course on the other end of it, being focused on, well, not so much just the family, but in a collective sort of a sense toward everything. And there's a lot of people can be against forms of communism and socialism, and they don't want to become a Borg and all this sort of thing. So I mean, yeah, people will have different types of people will have fears, toward embracing one polarity or the other. I think there, and for some cultures it's more one that they're afraid of, and in other cultures it's more often another. But that there is a balance we have to seek. I guess we need all of these things in some amount, right? And we might have to fluctuate with the swinging pendulum back and forth to really navigate and to utilize all of these things whatsoever.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that. And I feel like a lot of times where my natural enthusiasm will lie is like putting my energy into others or putting my energy into the collective. And I get a lot more enthusiastic about that, putting the energy like into my own life and self. But then when I realize I'm not putting that energy into my own self, and I'm like, oh wait, like I'm sick, or I'm not, hitting, my target with what I'm supposed to be doing for my life goals, and then it's like, okay, I've got to bring that energy from collective and then just like focus on, I guess that's definitely where I find most rewarding, like, and the collective, or just and the collective that comes like a lot of lifetime being done. But I guess karmic cycle, or if you ever see those with the young person, the person who's like, oh my god, we're gonna get that sense of entitlement, and someone who's very entitled or demanding, and it's like they may have had so many lives being literally a king or ruler or some kind of respected official, and then in this lifetime they incarnate and they're or a a tech support person, and it's like they have to break the cycle of being able to command people and stand there their way, and in this life they're just supposed to be on tech support or office man, and there's this life sense of self, and it's like they've unmatched from that cycle, and just start a new one, if that makes sense. And so looking at karmic cycles and what and catalyze and how you can break out of that and open up something new, that's very interesting. And more perspective, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, I seem to be getting a little bit of technical problems on my end again. We're all just having a little trouble with a breaking in between the sound, but I caught most of that. Another thing, when I was talking about the kind of fears different cultures can have of extremes, of these polarities, that I think we also just see a lot of examples out there, in society that, can be roles for these extreme examples, and we would want to get sucked into, becoming like that, becoming one of those people. And like I was saying about power and how it can have this corrupting sort of a tendency, sort of just tempting toward human nature. It's not something we can really explain. We think of humans as genuinely, just being benign toward themselves and other life forms. But I don't know. It perhaps there has to be a natural balance, and when too many factors place nature out of balance, that's what puts too much power in the hands of one or a few individuals, and that's what leads to the problem, because we haven't evolved to be able to handle that naturally yet. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And like talking about like cycles, power and power distribution, and that is interesting too, like different cycles of where power gets distributed, or who gets to be in power, or which members of society get to have a say. And I think it's really interesting. And how a great deal about these larger cycles. Say in the past several thousand years, we've been in a cycle of. There's people who say that you go back 50,000 years, and there's times where of matriarchy, and there well have been women who, used men, or women who were female chauvinists, if that makes sense. And thinking about, okay, like, well, 50,000 years ago, how well is this life cycles where there was power that was unevenly distributed over females, and some of the problems, that feels about with patriarchy now. It's possible that 50,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, when matriarchy, and there were men complaining, can't focus. So if you think about that haven't been recorded, and like cycles between matriarchy and patriarchy that have happened over thousands and thousands of years, I think that's something that's interesting as well. And like, when does it come to a balancing point, and when does it come out of balance, if that all makes sense?
Yes, certainly. I think also there are cycles in civilizations. I mean, the times that some civilizations are conquered by others, or just due to like different attitudes among their citizens, just dissolve and fail. It's just something that's necessary. It's like, I think a greater connection to the universal consciousness related to these sort of things. And some events can't be stopped. Can't be avoided. It's affecting everyone at once. I don't know. In recent years, people have talked a lot about these sort of things. I know, because I grew up through the era of when we had 1999 and 2000 occur, and then of course we had 2012. And a lot of people have had a lot of theories on the Mayan calendar relating to that. But there definitely are a lot of eras where we have this consciousness that we're all aware of that really seems to get affected in a strong way. I don't know. Have you noticed some proof and examples of this as well?
Yeah, I really noticed a huge shift between 2011 and 2012, and that was a time in my life where I wasn't particularly very awake. I would say I was more in that kind of heavier dark night of a soul phase, and it was almost like very disconnected from my spirit. And then beginning around 2012, I started to get some really intense, huge spiritual downloads. And it, I was so not really connected with what was happening in the quote unquote like new age world, or keeping as much up with spirituality. I was, at the time an art student, and I was more focused on, intellectual pursuits or art world. I wasn't thinking about spirituality or coming of the new age or age of Aquarius, etc. And I just started to get these huge, like, intense, spiritual downloads, almost to the point where it would be taking me like 4 or 5 hours to get out of the house, because it was like I was on this crazy like spiritual high or whatever. It was really, really wild. And it just really happened so much, unfolding between like end of 2011 to, throughout 2012, 2013. And it was like feeling these, feelings of like spiritual high or spiritual ecstasy. And then when I look back in time, I'm like, oh, wait, that was, during 2012. And so there really was something to it, because it was something that was very felt, but I wasn't really, paying attention to, what I guess people were saying about it, because I wasn't as immersed in the spiritual community. But then once I got myself more fully immersed, maybe around 2014, I was like, wow, that makes sense. That was totally, the shift and the click that was happening around that year and around that time. So I did definitely feel that. And I feel like whatever was happening around 1999 or 2000, I feel like I was just, so barely in my body. I mean, that was like high school time. I think my spirit was just like, no thanks. I think I'm going to go fly away to the faraway cosmos. So I was like, I don't even barely remember that part of my life. My spirit was so far away, God knows where, but it wasn't wanting to do high school. So, yeah, I definitely feel like 2012 was a profound time. But another really profound time of spiritual awakening for the mass consciousness was 2015. There was a time, and it was so profound, and I feel like it was the summer of 2015, even to the fall of 2015. And it's weird, I'm getting chills just as I speak of this. There was not only a great deal of meteor showers around the Lion's Gate and so many eclipses, the beginning of and ending of many cycles. There was the last Venus retrograde. We just had a Venus retrograde in March and April, but the previous Venus retrograde was happening during this really intense, profound summer, and there was gamma rays that were shooting out from the cosmos. And it's so weird. I don't usually get the chills, but as I'm like talking about these gamma rays, I'm literally getting the chills. But there was literally gamma rays that were coming down from the cosmos and inspiring and inciting this like mass consciousness. And I was getting these telepathic messages during that time about gamma rays, and I was so confused, because I was still kind of new in my mediumship, and I kept getting this word like gamma, like GAMMA, and I was like, oh, is my grandma saying hello to me? And because my grandma had passed on, and then it was like spirit was like, no, gamma rays, you moron, and then finally I was shown this article, and it was a direct type of channeling on this like obscure WordPress page, and it was a several page article of a channeling from Archangel Michael that was talking about gamma rays coming in for like this mass planetary consciousness. And then through time later on, I saw it cited in a couple different sources, and I was like, oh, gamma rays. That's what it was. That was what was this crazy intense energy that was happening during that several month span, like between like end of September 2015 and maybe between like end of May, beginning of June 2015. So it was like a 3-4 month span. And that was like another time of like huge, frequency upgrades and consciousness upgrades that were very felt. And I feel like it opened up a lot of permission in the mass consciousness scale for like every person, even people who were snoozing and asleep. It was like this loving alarm clock or wake up call coming from the cosmos. And I feel like since that time, there's been a lot more permission at a larger scale for people who didn't have the permission to wake up and be conscious, giving them that permission to wake up and be conscious, if that makes sense.
Yes, certainly. And all I can suggest for those of us choosing to contribute as light workers is that we are to be meditating and made available at the borders, not so much taking sides, but trying to understand everyone's role and offer what we can to everyone in their place here. But there's only so much you can expect to influence, and the rest you have to understand is meant to take care of itself in such a way. That being said, I believe that we can all, with our consciousness, affect what our reality is and becomes. So I don't know. I think it's that is a balancing act as well. Knowing when to accept what is and when to be sure to affect the future, even if it doesn't seem like the most likely future. That's perhaps more your perception than what reality has to be. Are there any final thoughts you want to give, or maybe anything to update on what your upcoming shows? Well, and they should know it's Mondays, 5 p.m. Or I'm sorry, so that would be 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Violet Vision. And what else would you like to add, Sava?
Oh, yeah. No, one last thing I can practically kick myself for not adding this is like the most important cycle to mention of all, which we're currently coming out of the Kali Yuga, which is, many, many years. I think it was maybe it's a 24,000 year cycle. It's either a 12,000 year or 24,000 year cycle of darkness of humanity. It was like humanity's dark night of the soul. And like, we're coming out of that into a time of like mass consciousness and global awakening. And it's like throughout, I'm not an expert on this by any means. I know Kali Yuga is the name of this huge planetary cycle that we're coming out of, and it's like this huge cycle of like mass consciousness and darkness and humanity falling asleep and being mean or harmful or vengeful, vindictive, and coming into this place of like mass consciousness, like mass awakening, global peace, global love, like peace on earth, etc. And so that's the most important cycle. And of course, I can't believe I got to mention that one, but that's what society is heading to. And I feel like 100 years down the road, we're coming to a much better place, a much more peaceful place, because we're slowly ascending from this space of the Kali Yuga, that place of mass darkness, and into a cycle of light where humanity can reach another peak and reach another apex. So that will be my final words. And of course, that was the most important thing to mention. And of course, I forget it until the end, but at least I got it in there.
Great. No, that was perfect, actually. And yeah, I'm going to be sure to look a bit more up on that myself. And it is inspiring out there. Perhaps they just got the age of Aquarius slightly too early in when they said it would be, and it's about to come in full swing here. Well, be sure to check out Violet Vision on Mondays, everyone. That's 6 p.m. Eastern, and check out my show again next week at the same time. Stephen D. Kelly will be up next. Thank you so much, Sava, for coming here tonight.
Thank you so much, Richard, for having me. And you have a wonderful, wonderful evening and a wonderful week.
Thank you so much. You as well, and happy solstice.
Happy solstice. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Stick around for the Stephen D. Kelly Show. And till next time, transcend the construct. Regards.